Positive effects of the Black Death. Picture the Black Death, year 1412, sourced from Wikimedia Commons. In this image, you can see people who are suffering from the plague, also known as the bubonic plague, and you can see over their bodies are these things called buboes, which was a common effect from people who suffered from the plague. The Black Death was one of the most disastrous pandemics in human history. But what was life like after this catastrophe? In order to answer this question, Sharon N. DeWitts analysed the skeletons from medieval graveyards. The archaeologists examined differences in survivorship and mortality risk between the pre- and post-Black Death populations of London. So survivorship is the people who survive, or what groups of society survived, and mortality risk is, mortality means likelihood of dying. So the mortality risk is how likely you were to die from the plague. Deaf populations of London, the results of this study suggest that the health of the population improved after this epidemic. There are compelling reasons to believe that the plague epidemic had beneficial effects for the health of the subsequent generations, subsequent meaning the next generations. By targeting frail people of all ages and killing them by the hundreds of thousands within an extremely short period of time, the Black Death might have represented a strong force of natural selection and removed the weakest individuals on a very broad scale within Europe. DeWitt elaborates. In addition, the Black Death significantly changed the social structure of some European regions. So when you think about social structure, hopefully you'll remember this term from the presentations we did recently on ancient civilizations. Another term is things like social hierarchy. Who has the most power in the society and what is the hierarchical structure? So think medieval Europe, you've usually got the kings on the top, then the nobles, then the knights or the church, and then the peasants at the bottom who have the least amount of power and usually get the pretty raw end of the deal. Tragic depopulation. So depopulation, D always means like the opposite of, so the population isn't growing, it's decreasing because people are dying. Tragic depopulation created the shortage of working people. So we know that the peasants would be the working people. This shortage caused wage rises. Products fell too. Consequently, standards of living increased. So what they're saying is after the Black Death, since there weren't very many workers anymore, the people who needed workers, like the nobility who owned the big farms, they had to actually start paying people more. Because all of a sudden there was not enough workers to go round, so the workers could choose where they went. And also the product prices fell, because if you've got all this food but no one to buy it, it's just going to go off. So you need to sell it. So it's better to sell it at a lower price than to let it just go moldy and go off. So not only are the workers getting paid more, they're also not having to spend as much money on their food and the other products. Consequently, standards of living is increased. So that means people's lives actually, as long as you didn't die, your life actually got better after the Black Death. For instance, people started to consume more food of higher quality. Now here we've got a little graph as well. And here is the survival rate, how likely you were to survive, with 0 being not very likely at all, and 1 meaning you're very likely to survive. And here we have the age. So here you are just born, and here you're 100 years old. And as you can see, there wasn't really anyone who was living to 100 years old during the Black Death. Over here we see the full black line. So this one here is after Black Death, and this dotted back line is before, pre-Black Death. And so what you can actually see is the survival rate with the age post-Black Death is actually better. You are more likely to be alive at 60 after Black Death than you were before Black Death. So actually the Black Death could be argued, unless you're one of the hundreds of thousands of people that died, Black Death actually improved your life and meant more likely that you're going to be able to live for a longer time. This interesting topic has been investigated previously, However, the secondary sources, remember how we've talked about primary and secondary sources before, however, the secondary sources were analysed mostly in the preceding historical studies. Unfortunately, it's difficult to generalise information from these sources because they document lives of specific members of society. So it might be diaries and letters, just talking about one person. You're not kind of getting a big picture of everyone in the society. The bioarchaeological data, so remember when we break down words, I hope you've heard of archaeologists before, so we might know what archaeological means, probably something like archaeologists, people who study the past. And bio, hopefully you know things like biology and biography. Bio means life. So these are archaeological data is very, very old data that looks at life. So the bioarchaeological data used in this study allow for the assessment of men and women and children of various socioeconomic status levels. So socioeconomic status, that's like what we were talking about up here, about social structure. Where are they in that social structure? So if you have high socioeconomic status, that means you're quite rich and you live at the top of the social hierarchy. If you're a low socioeconomic status, it means your family probably doesn't have very much money and you're one of the poorer members of society. So assessment of men and women and children of various socioeconomic status levels, most of whom are typically missing from many historical documents. So historical documents really only mostly talk about the rich people, because they're the only people who've got time to sit there and write books and that sort of stuff. And sometimes they're the only ones who can write. The scientist notes, the analysis of this information enables researchers to make more reliable inferences about health tendencies of that time. The study confirms that survival rate increased considerably among the members of the post-plague population. So people who survived the plague, the post-plague, after the plague, their survival rates increased dramatically. The author of the study concludes that the study results highlight the power that infectious diseases have to shape population-wide patterns of health and demography over both the short and long term.